The Oracle Network.
Talentless talent!
Talentless talent!
Talentless!
Talent?
Talentless?
Talentless!
Talentless talent! It's me, your host, Kylie Dills. Talentless Talent is a podcast about those with extraordinary talent. We're talking about conspiracy theories. We're talking to comedians. We're talking to painters. We are talking to those who make portraits. We're talking to dollhouse makers. We are talking to people about sports. We're talking to comedians. We're talking to sex workers. We're talking to models. We're talking to videographers. We have it all, including a very special pickle time. Talentless Talent is hosted by me, Kylie Dills, somebody who has no talent. So be sure to tune it in every Thursday. I'll catch you there, my Talentless Talent babes. We're having a good time.
Talentless talent.
Talentless Talent?
It's talentless talent.
Talentless Talent with Kylie Dills.
Hello and welcome to Reverie True Crime. I'm your host, Paige. Auckland, the most populated and diverse city in New Zealand, known for its multi-ethnic food spots, music, arts, and culture. The volcanic hills, twin harbors, the charming natural marvels, and so many adventures you can have there seem breathtaking and incredible. In a place that looks so magical and beautiful, in 2003, Auckland experienced nasty bloodshed, and fear was pulsing through many residents. Let's begin. Antonie Ronnie, known as Tony Dixon, was born in 1968 in Auckland, New Zealand. According to his sister, he had a horrendous childhood. Their mother was 47 years old when she gave birth to Tony, and they were Jehovah's Witnesses. She was always quoting Bible verses and continuously called her son the spawn of the devil, the rod of evil. His sister stated because he was so much younger, he got the full swing of her punishments. Since their parents separated when Tony was 7, and at 10 years old his father passed away, he was left alone with his mother all of the time. She would chain Tony outside, quote, like a dog. She would tell the brothers of the church to come beat him, and they would do so. She also took in many people who had mental issues, and Tony's sister said it was like living in a madhouse. She testified about the abuse that Tony endured, which included being forced as a child to participate in watching pornographic videos, and a friend of the family forced him to do sexual photo shoots. This family friend was found guilty of the accusations. Tony's sister said he enjoyed being the center of attention and, quote, in hindsight, he probably had attention deficit disorder as a child. Later, I will get into what the psychiatrist Dr. Justin Barry Walsh said after he evaluated Tony twice in 2005. Simone Butler was in her early 20s when she met Tony in February of 1997. She first knew of his meth use in 2001. After the September 11th attacks on the Twin Towers in the United States, he started getting paranoid and using meth even more. His drug abuse got terrible and extreme in 2002, according to Simone. The couple moved to Pipiroa in June of 2002. At this time, Tony was paranoid that he was being tracked by airplanes And this got worse when he moved Renee Gunby in that October. Tony claimed to have saved her life because she had been residing with a member of the Riverhead Rough Riders gang. He helped her get out of there and brought her into his home. He was trying to seem like the knight in shining armor at first, but she didn't know that he was just like the person she had been living with. Tony acted like he cared so much about her well-being. Renee and Simone had reportedly been friends since they were kids. Tony's constant paranoia started to take a huge toll on Simone's mental health. In 2005, she said she was still suffering from paranoia. She didn't think people were trying to murder him, but she thought maybe he was being watched. Tony used to be against drugs. He and Simone would have long talks about how awful drugs were. She never thought he would eventually touch drugs, much less become an addict. At Tony's house, he had a car repair shop. It was covered in graffiti, and the security measures taken were a bit extreme. He had surveillance cameras and double-sided bolts on all doors. Tony also kept weapons nearby. 2 of the weapons were a bat and a samurai sword. It was Renee's first day at the house, and Tony shot a gun towards her. The bullet went flying by her head and busted out a window. Simone had been beaten by Tony many, many times. She had nicknames for him, 2 being Good Tony and Ugly Man. The simplest things could make him extremely dangerous. The catalyst of the upsetting, tragic event to come was when Tony thought Simone was having sex with a policeman. She told him she had before, but never since then, and it was an awfully long time ago. Simone told him they should just go their separate ways, but he said, quote, "No way are you getting away from me." The abuse Simone suffered was horrific. He would assault her anywhere between a few seconds, or it could go on for many hours. One time, he hit her in the face with a ratchet. Tony reprimanded her once by chopping her hair off, and even took a chunk of lumber and beat her with it when she didn't open a door quick enough for his liking. Simone went on to leave her job to give all her attention only to Tony. She said that the controlling seemed to be so clever and not extremely noticeable to her that she really didn't recognize it until she was in a self-induced cage. Simone was very sympathetic and empathetic towards Tony and his awful childhood. As a lot of people do, me included, she thought with love and compassion, patience and understanding that she could make him good, well, happy and balanced. With Renee, things were no different. She was treated the same way. Tony would supervise her and tell her when she could and could not use her phone. He told her mom, quote, "I don't let Renee out of my sight for her own safety." Well, that was a gigantic red flag to Renee's mom. January 20th, 2003. Renee Gumby's mom, Kathy, pleaded with her daughter to get out of that situation, to leave that house, because Tony was agitated and incoherently jabbering. Kathy was petrified and had an unnerving feeling that Tony was going to kill her daughter. There are 2 different reports about Renee and her mom trying to get Tony help. One says Renee and her mom had pulled into the driveway at Tony's home. Another says that Renee and Tony went to Kathy's house. Either way, Renee was concerned about Tony and expressed to him that he may need to go get psychiatric help. Well, as you can imagine, that did not go over well. This set off his rage. He went ballistic, saying they were setting him up with the police. So the mother and daughter duo decided to leave. Tony began trailing behind them in his car, going way too fast, weaving dangerously through heavy traffic and blinking his lights at them. Kathy finally pulled her car over. She wanted to let Renee and Tony attempt to have a conversation, and maybe it would calm him down. Renee decided to get in his car and take off with him. Before she did, Kathy said she begged her daughter not to go because she feared for her life. Renee just snickered, telling her mom not to be so silly. She said, quote, "I've got to go. I've got to go with him." On January 21st, 2003, things turned more dangerous than ever before. Tony was in a frenzy and grabbed a hammer as Renee lifted her arm to protect her face. He struck her so hard that he broke the skin and fractured bones. But he didn't stop there. Renee quickly snatched up a few towels and wrapped them around her arm tightly to subside the bleeding, doing her best to stay conscious. Tony claimed God instructed him to take his samurai sword and viciously go after Simone and Renee. This would happen when Simone had just gotten home around 7 p.m. Tony seemed tranquil and not angry at all as he welcomed her home. But soon after, he snapped. Tony started shouting that Simone had tried to poison him and kept going on and on about her sleeping with a policeman because in his mind that really happened and he believed it. Tony fully hacked Renee's left hand off, saying her hand was a wicked hand that made drugs. He also slit her throat. Renee was bleeding out and laying in her pool of blood with her hair scalped as well. Death was exceptionally near for Renee. After the EMTs arrived on the scene, she was 5 or 10 minutes from dying. Her throat was sliced and there was a huge hole in her skull. There was a deep cut on her shoulder which still gives her a lot of trouble now. However, she did make it to the hospital and her mother stayed by her bedside for a week after she had been sewn and stapled. Her hand, unfortunately, could not be reattached. While she was in the hospital, she received a beautiful bouquet of flowers, as did Simone. The note with the flowers said, quote, "With love, sorry, Tony." Kathy trashed the flowers that were sent to her daughter. During that awful night, Tony also cut Simone's arms halfway off, which later were able to be reattached after many surgeons worked on her for 27 hours. The women were screaming and begging him to stop as he was ranting and raving, and just continued. That is until the samurai sword eventually broke because he used so much force. If it had not broken, he likely would have kept on until they were both dead. Renee was being accused by Tony of being someone who used drugs, flipping on him and the lifestyle they lived by becoming an informant for police. What he did seems unbelievable, like something out of the goriest horror movie. Later, Renee would tell the authorities not staying with her mother was the biggest mistake she had ever made. Quote, "I should have stayed in the car with my mom, but you make the wrong decisions sometimes, and I suppose I have to pay for that. Tony was the one who called 111, telling them about Simone and Renee's injuries. He gave these details all so calmly, but he was lying to the operator, saying the two had fallen off the roof. Renee recalled that evening, saying, quote, "He said that I had to bow my head to him so he could chop it off, but I would not. I was trying to stay calm." Simone told the court, quote, "And then we were all screaming, and I don't know who he went for first. I think he went back and forth between us. He was screaming and yelling and bouncing about everywhere, and crazy and psycho and just horrible. All I remember about it was so much screaming, blood, and silver. I just remember thinking, I wonder if I'm dead or alive, but I didn't feel any pain, so I thought I must have been dead." Following this unbelievable attack, Tony and his friend Roger Reekers, who was in the shed when all of this was happening, drove off. They smoked meth together as they traveled on. They used Roger's meth pipe, which Tony somehow managed to break. Roger then drove to Hamilton, where he left Tony. Tony stole a car and began to drive north. At a gas station, Tony bought a light bulb so he could keep on smoking meth. Next, Tony ran off, stole a vehicle, and went to Highland Park, which is a suburb in Auckland. He had a submachine gun that he had made himself. He parked his car by two other cars behind a gas station. Tony was gesturing and mouthing vulgarities at people in one of the cars. James T. Ott, who was in one of the parked cars, got out and walked towards Tony's car. He got pretty close to it, but then James must have seen something. He turned and ran. Tony then executed James by shooting him 10 times in the back at a close range, killing him instantly. Tony said he saw James's face and saw the devil. Tony also stated that James was a demon out to assassinate him. James was taken from his loving partner, Julie Cropley, and their child. Tony stayed there and waited for the police. He wanted to go out, suicide by cop. However, when the cops did not fire on him, he went on the run. Tony hightailed it and rushed into the home of a man named Ian Miller, because at this point, Tony was being chased by the police and had shot at a police dog handler 4 times, as well as 1 bullet hitting a police car. Ian's partner, Karen Power, had just gotten home around 12 a.m. 2 hours later, they were woken up out of their slumber to loud beating and banging on their bedroom door. Karen slightly opened the door and Tony busted into their bedroom. Right after Tony had rushed into Ian's home, Ian had a phone call from the cops saying there was a fugitive on the run around his location and he should lock all windows and doors. Ian said, quote, "The fugitive isn't on the loose, he's with me." Tony was brandishing his homemade gun. Luckily, Karen was able to get away. However, Ian wasn't so fortunate. Tony held him captive for hours at gunpoint. He was irate and extremely hyped up as he told Ian that things were going to get, quote, "messy if you don't do what I tell you to do." During Tony's trial, Ian talked about the incident, stating to the prosecutor, Richard March, quote, "He indicated he already killed someone that night, so he meant business." Tony had also told Ian about chopping his girlfriend's hand off as well. While he was being held captive in his bedroom, Ian told Tony, quote, "Well, you've had a very busy night." As Tony held this man hostage in his bedroom, he was rambling off nonsense, saying one of the women that he tried to kill had a homing device attached to her. He was being tracked by a 747 jumbo airplane, and he was being stalked by satellites. He told Ian, quote, "I'm not going to see the light of day, one way or another." He also said one more victim was neither here nor there to him. The police were outside surrounding the house. Tony told Ian they should both dress just alike and make a run for it, saying he would use Ian as a shield, but that thankfully did not happen. Ian told him he didn't like that idea at all, that the police were going to fire shots at them, and he wasn't ready to get shot yet. Ian stated that Tony finally started to become a little more relaxed after a while, and they began to have a dialogue back and forth. Ian said he even felt safer, having this gut instinct that he might be able to leave his own bedroom, and Ian told Tony, quote, "To hell with this, I'm going for a beer, and if you want a drink, you can follow me." Both of the men went to the kitchen. Ian grabbed a beer, but Tony just had some orange juice. As Ian was being held hostage in his own home, the police would call and Ian would tell the negotiator that he was okay, that everything was fine. Tony started to become really chilled out and let Ian go. He told Ian he was a good guy and he could leave the house. Ian informed Tony that he would like for him to go outside with him. Tony said he hadn't made up his mind. He didn't know which way he was going to go as of yet, and he needed more time to sit and think about it. Ian said, "See ya, mate," as he sauntered out of his home. Now this all happened in a span of 11 hours. While he was on his maniacal spree, Tony had been wired up on meth. Obviously, meth is not good for anyone to be on, but coupling meth and possible mental illness and or a developmental disability, you have got yourself a definite recipe for a disaster of some kind. Now, tweaking is the most severe and unsafe stage for meth users and addicts. When the drug, known in New Zealand as P for pure methamphetamine, no longer makes them feel that rush, energy, and high that they desire so much, they may not sleep for days. The person could undergo psychosis, and the only world they exist in is their own. They see and hear things that are not there, hallucinations that are so real and so powerful that the person is removed from reality completely. The user may become violent and hazardous to themselves and anyone in their presence. After the standoff with the cops, Tony finally came out of Ian and Karen's home. He was handcuffed by the Armed Offenders Squad, read his rights, and hauled off to jail. He was charged with murder, shooting at police, firearms charges, kidnapping, and causing grievous bodily harm. Early in February of 2005, Tony showed up at the High Court at Auckland. It was a 6-week trial. He was found guilty and convicted of murder, kidnapping, and using a firearm against a police officer. In June of 2008, he did have a retrial, and it was the same result, guilty, on July 30th, 2008. Tony was incarcerated and awaiting his sentence hearing, which was to be on February the 9th, 2009. As the court was dismissing for a lunch break on one occasion, Tony got Kathy's attention and made a chopping motion with his arms. Well, Kathy clapped back by scraping her finger across her throat. The defense psychiatrist Dr. Justin Barry Walsh testified that after he evaluated Tony in 2005 twice, that he had some mental abnormalities. Tony said he wanted to kill himself, but God said it was sacrilegious. He also wanted to murder others while at the same time having, quote, flashes of humor. Tony thought he was the center of a huge conspiracy, and he would also talk about religious themes a lot. Tony said he and God talked to each other, that he had special powers and he saw visions of vampires. Whenever the psychiatrist challenged anything Tony said, he held on to his beliefs with great certainty and compassion. He stood by what he said and thought it all to be indisputable truths. Tony said, quote, God was the one who told me to chop their heads off. The girls didn't want to look like a sideshow in a funny farm, so they didn't say anything about that. Later, Dr. Jansen told the court Tony said God had told him Renee Gumby and Simone Butler were trying to kill him. Tony said God said they were two Judases. He said 10 years ago he cut his hand, but instead of fixing his cut, the doctor sedated him and put a chip into him. He said, quote, I cut into my right hand and drilled into my kneecaps to find the chip. During an exam, Dr. Jansen observed an arrow-shaped scar on Tony's right hand and 2 oval marks on both sides of his knees. Tony stated he had no choice but to cut into his arm with a knife, searching for embedded chips. Later, he went on to the Mason Clinic in Auckland, saying, quote, the employees only spoke Asian. They thought I was stupid. They wanted to set me up. They were working with the police and the government. I don't give a fuck what they do to me. I'm a dead man. The police weren't buying the insanity defense at all. They called him a gold-plated psychopath. The prosecutors did accept the fact that Tony had severe personality disorder, was highly intoxicated, but not insane, that he was crippled with paranoia, but believed he knew exactly what he was doing that day. The prosecution chose not to call Renee Gunby to the stand because Tony had sent her letters coaching her on what she should say. Renee would not be a reliable witness. On the day that he was arrested, Tony told the police, everyone will take notice of me now. Era Moana will be a walk in the park compared to this. I'll go down in a blaze of glory. Dr. Jansen asked Tony if he had done any drugs on the day of the violent acts. He said, I didn't take any P, pure methamphetamine. That is a police excuse to explain what has happened. No one else has done what I have done. A lot of people are taking P out there. Sourcing from a piece called Cops, Crooks, and Crimes by Matt Black in 2014, he spoke with a man named Charles, a former user, cook, and dealer who did time with Tony. Charles said that Tony was still using in prison. Quote, there's a group of people who should not touch it at all because they just lose it. They are just not mentally equipped. Tony Dixon was one of those people. He sat down with me at the table. He'd been using, and he said, you see those 2 sparrows flying around there? Watch out for them, mate. One's the camera, and the other one's the listening device. They were just two sparrows that were flying around in the unit. That's the extent of the psychosis. On another occasion, Charles said, "I heard this thump, bang bang, so I called the guards and said, 'Look, Dixon's doing something to his cellmate.' Tony had picked up the TV and smashed it over his head because the guy had beaten him at chess. This guy came out with bits of his face hanging off." Charles says it's easy to get meth in prison. Quote, "They chuck 5 grams into a wing nut and throw it over the wall. A lot of people have got mobile phones. You say, 'I'm going to be in the yard 3 this afternoon.' Just throw it in there. Inside, say, a wing of 100 people. There'd be 6 or 8 of them still on it, full noise." End quote. I'll also link this story in the show notes as well. Renee and Simone would still go and have visits with Tony. He also has an ex-wife, Wendy Ross, who also kept in contact with him, even though, to get as far away from Tony as she could, she had flown halfway around the world to start a new life for herself. In 1988, Wendy was so attracted to his fun, good-natured, enthusiastic personality. However, that didn't last long. Several months later, he started striking her on the head because she was moving too slow for whatever he asked of her. Wendy basically taught herself how to act as to not set off his intense, vicious mood swings. It was when Tony started to foam at the mouth and talk out of his head at an extremely fast pace that she knew she had to leave. However, she spoke good words about him when she was called to the witness stand, which to some does seem like a fear response. Wendy said that Tony seems possessed, and she does think he has more than a few personalities. She went on to say that he was charming, generous, talented, and had a contagious personality. Wendy said the reason why she went to see him in prison is because he has no one, and she felt bad for him. Renee's mom, Kathy, thinks this very strange attachment and loyalty that all of these women had to Tony was a survival technique. Sometimes people do create this bond to the one who abuses them. Stockholm Syndrome could likely be the case. Kathy said, quote, "It explains the inexplicable. There can be no other explanation." Tony wrote Renee over 100 letters while incarcerated. Kathy gave every letter to the police. One day, Tony even called Renee 45 times. Renee now lives on edge and never stays in one living situation for long, possibly out of fear, but it still didn't stop her from going to see Tony. Kathy believes her daughter has all the signs of Stockholm Syndrome because she just could not escape him. She said people can appear to consent to abuse or imprisonment and even have fond feelings for their abuser, but they are still victims regardless. Kathy said, quote, "There's no way Renee could escape. He was obsessive about her nature, her beauty, and her talent. She was constantly under his supervision. She was entrapped, and she thought her family was under threat." Tony's sister Carla wasn't afraid to tell the court that her brother was a magnet to women that he could manipulate, dictate, and have power over. As mentioned in the beginning, she went on to talk about his abusive childhood, how strict of a Jehovah's Witness mother they had, how she was so cruel to Tony, and all of the sexual abuse. Tony told the court in 2008 that he had no part of this world because of his Jehovah's Witness upbringing. He described his mother as a schizophrenic and said, quote, "I understood from a young age that was my role in life, to be ridiculed or persecuted." He told about his mother and her friends from the church molesting him and raping him. He claimed that he was padlocked to the fence so much and was made to bark like a dog that he could intuitively converse with dogs, which is why he loves them so much. Tony said he thought he had grown up okay, seeing as he did not take advantage of children sexually like he was taken advantage of growing up. Sourcing from the NZ Herald when they reported about the court hearing, Tony said, quote, "The sexual abuse wasn't too bad. There were about 20 people doing it on regular occasions, but there was violence. It was a normal thing in Jehovah's Witness when you hear things." Going on to say that he heard the voice of God and believed he was the chosen one. He went on to say, quote, "I thought the police were out to kill me and the government had killed parts of my family." Tony said that he believes his reward will be in the next world. His mother had taught him to be suspicious of other people, and Tony said he thought the world was a judgmental place. He said he had inherited his demons from his father, since his mother had told him that is where his problems came from. Around the age of 10, he went into an institution. Tony described how he received messages from music or programs which referred to the New World Order. Once he heard these messages, they became a sign which led him to believe people were tracking him and trying to kill him. When defense lawyer Barry Hart asked if he seriously believed people were following him, Tony replied, yes. There was a conspiracy against him which continued to this day. He told about the Boeing 747 that he believes was following him. He believed his car and house were bugged and tracking devices had been put into his skin. He said they're out to get me. Tony stated that the police operation against him was part of the New World Order conspiracy because police thought that he was involved in terrorist activities. Again, that was from the NZ Herald. On August 4th, 2008, NBC News reported that Tony had a MySpace where he wrote he was complicated but down to earth. He posted selfies of himself in prison, chest tattoos, and a tattoo that said, Gangster Killer Club. He also talked about, quote, cutting the gals. MySpace quickly removed his page. The corrections department had to come out with a statement. They said Tony does not have access to the internet and someone on the outside was managing that MySpace page. However, they did just recently find out about the cell phone he had someone smuggle in for him. On August 24th, 2008, Tony's son landed in jail just a few cells down from his dad for robbery. On February 5th, 2009, 40-year-old Tony was found dead in his cell right after a visit with his psychiatrist, and he was supposed to go to court that morning. His lawyer said that he would not take his medicine and was jumped and beaten many times by the other prisoners. The lawyer believed Tony should have been in a psych unit and not in a prison cell. At first, how he died was unknown. He had head and neck injuries, but they had to figure out how. So an investigation began to find out what happened. The investigation concluded that Tony beat his head against the wall of his cell over and over. Tony supposedly even got a running start and surged headfirst into the wall. Before all of this happened, someone also saw Tony drinking from the toilet bowl. His mental health had been declining for many weeks, and Tony's lawyer said the corrections department let Tony down, that he should have been in a psych ward permanently. A psychiatrist, Mr. Krishna, who was with Tony right before he died and had been working with him since 2003, said, quote, Mr. Dixon was a very challenging individual with an extremely changeable and unreliable presentation. I formed a working diagnosis of severe personality disorder with mixed narcissistic and antisocial personality traits, end quote. But also, Tony was known for lying and exaggerating his symptoms, and that made him harder to correctly diagnose. Dr. Krishna went on to say, quote, from time to time he carried on an obsessive religiosity in relation to his faith, believing he was one of the last 144,000 who were mentioned in the revelation of St. John who would be saved. As such he had, it appeared, a profound belief in his own righteousness and his own safe delivery to the afterlife, end quote. Tony left behind 9 children. When Renee Gunby heard about his death, Kathy said that she spent the whole day somberly with her horses. Tony's son was again arrested in July of 2009. The police were called because of gunshots that were heard in an apartment. They caught up with Tony's son as he was fleeing the scene. The police arrested him that night, July 31st. Nobody was hurt in the incident involving the gunshots. The police did find a lot of meth on Tony's son. It seemed as if he had a lot for the purpose of selling. He wouldn't cooperate with the police at all. And this all started because members of a gang were supposedly trying to force him to give them all of his drug money. The charge of possession to supply methamphetamine means Tony's son was caught red-handed with at least 5 grams of meth, a street value between $5,000 and $10,000. One person that turned their life completely around is Simone Butler, especially after Tony died, which she said was the icing on the cake that allowed her to really live again, and she made something good out of a traumatic situation. She wrote a memoir called Double-Edged Sword in 2016, which details everything she went through that January evening in 2003. She even revealed, quote, he wanted me to bow down, to kneel, so that when he chopped my head off, it would land in the washing basket, because he didn't want a mess. I wouldn't back down, end quote. Her book goes into her natural healing with a shaman, which led to Simone's own trauma healing business. She offers spiritual counseling and flower essence therapy. She said, I specialize in trauma recovery, eliminating depression and anxiety. I help people move past trauma and to be able to live a joyous and empowered life again. Soul loss is a real thing. I went through a lot of soul retrieval to retrieve those lost parts of myself. And soul illness too is a major issue. End quote. On the YouTube channel RNZ, Simone is on the first episode of a series called Breaking Silence, and it's from 8 months ago. I have not yet watched this video, but I definitely am, and I'll have the link to it labeled in the show notes for you all as well. Now, things did not turn out so positively for Renee. NZME reported that Renee was taken into custody in 2016 after a rigorous police investigation into methamphetamine distribution. Renee Gumby was sentenced to 5 years and 7 months in jail on 9 charges of possession or supply of meth and 2 charges of possessing iodine. Renee was initially sentenced to 9 years. However, 15% of her time was cut due to guilty pleas and a further 25% was cut due to personal situations. It's never been officially stated, but the clemency on her prison sentence is likely a result of the trauma imposed on her by Tony Dixon. A psychologist report given to Justice Davidson diagnosed Renee as suffering from PTSD. Justice Davidson said to Renee, quote, "Your condition is triggered by a number of things present in the prison environment. In particular, being behind locked doors and confined reminds you of events in your past during which you were detained and injured. You also continue to suffer the effects of a head injury inflicted on that occasion." End quote. It's very likely that Renee's stay in prison worsened her PTSD and exposed her to anxiety and depression. I could not find out where she is now. I don't know if she is still serving time, if she's been released, or is she scheduled to be released this year. If anyone knows anything about Renee Gumby, feel free to let me know and I'll give an update in the beginning of a new episode. I want to talk about what I could find on the murder victim, James T. Ott. In 2003, James's uncle David spoke out about James, saying, quote, "James was well liked. His personality was open to people, very forthcoming." His uncle David said during the ups and downs of James's life, his relationship with his family, and his love and devotion to his 3 children, who were 8, 4, and 18 months in 2003, was unquestioned. Julie Cropley, James's significant other, was dealing with things as well as she could at the time, and she was receiving a lot of support and love from extended family. James's Aunt Margaret said the couple's 3 children had spent a lot of time with their father since his body was returned to the family. While researching for this episode, I came across Jehovah's Witness cults, which gave me an idea for another series in the future about religious cults, and probably starting off with Jehovah's Witness cults, if you all would be interested in that. So as soon as I can get around to it, I really want to do that, but I also want you to give me feedback on what you think about that topic. So this is going to wrap up today's episode. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, you know the drill. Stay safe and take care.